Sage Wanderer here, and welcome to another episode of Hellfire! I'll never get tired of that. So I want to talk briefly about a concept called Solo Scriptura, which is Latin, which basically means scripture only. The history of Solo Scriptura dates back to the Reformation, to the splitting and fragmenting of the church and and removal of Christians from Catholicism. So there was a ton of debate, before it got bloody and it became a war, literally a killing war. So many people died during the Protestant Reformation. But before then, it was a debate, and in this debate, the reformists, the Protestants, really couldn't win an argument as long as Catholics were allowed to use the writings of the Church Fathers. And I'm referring to Augustine, Polycarp, people like that. People that evangelical Christians have no knowledge of, really. I mean, I just don't see how they, maybe nowadays, but once upon a time, it was a sin in the evangelical movement to study the church prior to Martin Luther. And so they had to come up with this rule that you aren't allowed to argue anything to do with Christianity with any other source but the Bible. And I would say that if you believe that you're either thinking foolishly or you're a straight out hypocrite. Here's why. Because you reference things that aren't in the Bible every day in every sermon. You couldn't make your end-time eschatology hold together if you didn't reference the newspaper and the current events and frame things into a context based on our current situation. That you will use historical facts like Hitler's rise to justify and to frame certain elements of biblical scripture, and that you are doing this, but you only use Sola Scriptura to fight when you don't like something someone says. You say, you can't quote that, it's not scripture. Well, then you can't quote the New York Times, it's not scripture. Sola Scriptura, I believe, is a pathway to ignorance. And I think most, if not all, evangelical, cultish offshoots of faith that pervert the gospel are because you can accomplish just about anything if you're not allowed to bring any other evidence except the Bible. You can use the Bible and twist it to prove just about anything. And that the history of the church and the church fathers are necessary sometimes to help us understand. They were closer in the timeline to Jesus than we are. I think the early church, the church even prior to Constantine, another person that unfortunately most evangelical preachers are clueless about. I mean, it would be disturbing for them to be forced to recognize that Constantine was not a Christian and would not be baptized and accept Christ until his deathbed because he knew he had too many evil, ugly things that God would not approve of to do to try to unite the Roman Empire. And that, just a quick history here for you people, if you don't know this, for the people that are questioning me right now. Constantine was a Roman emperor who decided he needed a one world religion, and the one that best suited him was kind of a fad in Rome at the time that was starting to gather some momentum within the Roman culture. And it was monotheistic in nature, and it was perfect for him since he wanted to do away with the worship of the other deities that had been dominating Roman culture and bring them all under one government and one religion. So he gathered up every bishop on the earth at the point of a sword and forced them to come to Nicaea, however you want to pronounce it, and to codify and come up with a set of books that everyone could agree on, and a statement of faith known as the Nicene Creed. So this was done by a secularist, by a pagan, really. And it was ugly. Men were ripped from their homes and forced to come to this place and were not allowed to leave. And anyone that dissented, I mean, people had their beards ripped out by the roots. People were killed. People had their churches burned because they would not comply with the rule of Constantine. So to say that there are a lot of useful scriptural type writings that have a whole lot of use to a modern Christian that weren't codified in the canonization of the Bible. I mean, let me put it this way. There is so much Christian doctrine that is based on apocryphal texts, and you don't even know it. Unless you're a student of these things, you don't know it. You know, I was in a church a while back up in the mountains. I stopped in a family church. And the man's sermon there was really, at the core of it, was the story of Christ going to Hades, or going to hell, essentially, and freeing the captives. He talked about how Jesus went down and he beat on the gates of hell, and Beelzebub says, "Who is this person?" And the devil was there bragging, and he said, "Oh, it's Jesus. I killed him. He was a pain in my neck, so I killed him." And Beelzebub, another principal demon, says, "What have you done? Now you've given him authority to come into Hades, and he can do whatever he wants to me because he has the power to." And Christ marched in there like he owned the place and freed the captives, the patriarchs of the Jewish faith. Now, that story isn't in the Bible. It comes from an apocryphal text known as the Gospel according to Nicodemus. And that early church history prior to the Reformation and the rejection of all apocryphal texts, including some that were in the Bible up until then, are still in the Catholic Bible, like the Maccabees, for instance. When we restricted the Bible to just a set number that fit best in the concept of evangelical Christian thought, or Protestant thought is better. Evangelical is the grandchild of Protestantism. But, this concept that you have to stick to the Bible, it's robbing people of a lot of power. And here's the thing, you talk about Solo Scriptura, but you'll get insight from the demonic, from a Satanist who leaves the organization and comes out and starts to talk about it. Well, what makes that information any less usable than ancient texts of demonology and ancient studies of the demonic that aren't a part of the Bible? What about what the church fathers and the desert fathers had to say about this? What about the physical battles the physical battles that the desert fathers had in caves with the demonic, where they came out scratched and clawed from it? I mean, do you know anything about the history of the church? It didn't start the day that Martin Luther nailed up his indictments. So, in understanding the demonic, especially, I'll never make theological decisions, or I will never use things outside the Bible for doctrine. But in understanding the enemy, I think it's important. You got to study their text, their history. You got to know where these demons come from, their nature, their type, their sort, their alignments. And much of the doctrine that you believe is not found in the Bible, because it comes from the Catholic Church prior to the Reformation and was carried over into the Protestant Reformation as just a matter of knowledge and fact. But when you go to the source, it's outside the Bible in many cases. It's from stories, experiences, the true fight between the holy men and the devil that occurred in real life. So I will often quote things and refer to things that are not necessarily in the Bible, because if you want to defeat your enemy, you must first know them. All right. Hope that wasn't too offensive. I get spirited about this kind of stuff. I love you all. We're all on the same side. And that's why I say go back and look at the first episode of Hellfire, where I talk about, in the kingdom discussion, where I talk about uniting us all together to agree to fight the enemy together in whatever way we can. All right. God bless the church. God bless America. God bless the world. And God bless you. Turn it off.